You know, there's this saying that love in Hollywood never lasts. And honestly, when we look at the headlines, it feels true. We see breakups, divorces, custody battles, cheating scandals. Every week there's some new drama splashed across magazines or going viral online. It's almost become a stereotype. If you're a celebrity, your relationship probably has an expiration date. But here's the twist. What if I told you there's one actor, one of the most famous and complicated stars of our time, who, despite all the chaos, still believes in something rare, something almost old-fashioned? And that's timeless romance. Yes, I'm talking about Johnny Depp. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Johnny Depp? The guy who has had one of the most public, messy, and controversial lives in Hollywood history? The man who was literally at the center of one of the biggest celebrity trials of the decade? How could he possibly be the one who believes in forever love? But that's exactly what makes this so fascinating. Because when you look past the headlines, when you actually pay attention to what he says, what he does, and how he treats the people he's loved, you start to see a different picture. You start to see a man who, for all his flaws, is actually a die-hard romantic. Let's rewind to the beginning of his journey in love. In the 80s and 90s, Johnny was known as one of the most eligible bachelors in Hollywood. Young, mysterious, ridiculously talented. Women adored him. He dated actresses, models, singers, and even got engaged more than once. Remember Sherilyn Fenn, Jennifer Grey, and then, of course, Winona Ryder. That relationship was iconic. Fans loved them together. They were the ultimate Hollywood couple. Two young stars madly in love. And Johnny, being Johnny, went all in. He tattooed Winona Forever on his arm. Now sure, after the breakup he changed it to Wino Forever, which fans still joke about to this day. But look at what that really says about him. He didn't remove it. He didn't pretend it never happened. He turned it into something else. Something that still carried meaning. And that's kind of Johnny's philosophy about love. He doesn't erase it. He carries it. He transforms it, and that brings us to Vanessa Paradis. Honestly, if you ask most fans, they'll tell you that Johnny and Vanessa were the love story that came closest to forever. They met in the late 90s, and for more than a decade, they built a life together. They had 2 children, Lily Rose and Jack. They lived quietly in France, away from Hollywood's constant spotlight. And for a long time, it looked like Johnny had found his forever. Even though they never married, their bond seemed unbreakable. And here's the part that really shows who Johnny is. Even after they split, he never trashed her. He never used the media to take shots at her. Instead, he spoke with respect, with admiration, with warmth. He called her a friend for life. How often do you hear that after a breakup in Hollywood? Not very often. Think about it. Most celebrity exes barely speak to each other after things end. Some won't even stand in the same room. But Johnny chose to honor what they had, even though it ended. And that tells us something about how he views love. To him, love doesn't just disappear. It changes. It evolves. But it never really dies. And isn't that such a rare way of looking at things? Especially in today's world where people move on so quickly, swipe left, swipe right, ghost each other, and act like the past never mattered. But then came the chapter that nearly destroyed everything. Amber Heard. This was not just another breakup. This was chaos. This was global headlines, courtrooms, testimonies, endless debates on social media. For years, it felt like the whole world was divided into Team Johnny and Team Amber. It was exhausting to watch, so imagine how exhausting it must have been to live it. Now here's the thing. Anyone else in Johnny's shoes might have given up on love completely after something like that. Anyone else might have turned bitter, cynical, maybe even angry at the idea of romance. But Johnny? Even after all of that, even after having his private life dissected and judged by millions, he still said that he believes in love. He still said that trust, loyalty, and devotion matter. That love, despite everything, is something worth holding on to. That kind of faith, after everything he's been through, is almost unbelievable. And that's what makes his secret so interesting. Because Johnny's secret to forever love isn't about avoiding pain. It's not about having the perfect relationship. Clearly, he hasn't had that. His life is proof that love can be messy, complicated, even devastating. But through it all, he never stops believing in it. He never stops carrying it with him. And maybe that's the lesson here. That forever love isn't about never breaking. It's about never giving up on the belief that love matters. Here's another detail most people don't know. Johnny is what you'd call a hopeless romantic in the truest sense. Friends and insiders have said that he's the kind of man who writes handwritten letters, who saves little keepsakes from relationships, who remembers anniversaries years later. He's sentimental in a way that feels almost old-fashioned. And when you look at his art, his music, his roles, you see those themes of love and loyalty woven throughout. Edward Scissorhands, for example, is a character defined by longing, innocence, and love. Captain Jack Sparrow, in his own chaotic way, is deeply loyal to the people he cares about. These characters resonate with Johnny because, in a way, they reflect parts of himself. Psychologists often say that artists and storytellers live in a different world when it comes to love. Their hearts and minds don't work the same way as most people's, where others might see relationships as fleeting moments, chapters. You can close and walk away. Artists see them as threads in a much larger story. To them, every relationship is part of a narrative, and that narrative never really ends. Love, even when it breaks or changes shape, isn't wasted. It lingers. It leaves fingerprints on the soul, and when you look at someone like Johnny Depp, this idea suddenly makes so much sense. Johnny isn't just an actor. He's a musician, a painter, a poet at heart. He's always been more than just the characters he plays. His whole life has been one long creative project, filled with stories, images, and music that reflect the way he sees the world. And in his world, love isn't disposable. Love is eternal. Think about it. In our modern age, most people treat relationships like apps on their phone. If something goes wrong, they delete it, block it, move on. Photos vanish, text messages are erased, memories get buried. People almost act like they can wipe the slate clean as if nothing ever happened. But storytellers, artists, they don't do that. They don't delete. They document. They transform. They turn their joy and their heartbreak into something that outlives the relationship itself. And Johnny is the perfect example of that. Take his Winona Forever tattoo, for instance. Back in the early 90s, when he was madly in love with Winona Ryder, he tattooed those words onto his body. That's not the act of someone who takes love lightly. That's the act of someone who believes, in that moment, that love really could be forever. And when the relationship ended, he didn't erase it completely. He didn't laser it off and act like it never existed. He simply altered it to "We Know Forever," a cheeky, humorous twist that still left the history intact. Think about the symbolism of that. It's not about erasing. It's about carrying. It's about transforming. It's about acknowledging that love existed and mattered, even if it didn't last. That's how artists see the world. They know that the beauty of a story isn't in its length, but in its impact. A chapter might end, but it leaves marks on the pages that follow. Johnny doesn't pretend his past relationships never happened. He carries them, even if quietly. You can hear it in the way he speaks about Vanessa Paradis, the mother of his 2 children. Even years after their separation, he called her a friend for life, someone he will always respect and admire. That kind of language doesn't come from someone who erases the past. It comes from someone who believes that love, once it enters your life, becomes a permanent part of who you are. Psychologists point out something fascinating about this kind of mindset. They say that people who live and breathe creativity, musicians, painters, writers, actors, often have what's called a narrative identity. That means they make sense of their lives by telling themselves stories about it. Every relationship, every heartbreak, every triumph becomes part of the story they carry with them. And because of that, they're less likely to dismiss love as just another fling or a mistake. Even when it hurts, even when it ends badly, they find meaning in it. They turn it into art, into music, into poetry. Now think about Johnny's career. So many of the roles he's chosen over the years are infused with longing, loyalty, and love that endures despite pain. Edward Scissorhands, perhaps his most iconic role, is about a character who loves so deeply, so purely that he spends his life creating beauty for the one he adores, even though they can never truly be together. Does that sound like someone who takes love lightly? Or does it sound like someone who understands that love doesn't have to end just because circumstances change? That it can live on in gestures, in memories, in acts of devotion? Even Captain Jack Sparrow, in all his chaos and mischief, shows unexpected depth when it comes to loyalty and connection. Beneath the humor and swagger, Jack is a character who values the bonds he makes, however unconventional. And when you realize how much of Johnny's own personality bleeds into his roles, you start to see a pattern. He gravitates toward characters defined by love, longing, and loyalty, because that's who he is at his core. Now let's step back and compare him to most people today. In a world of casual dating, instant swipes, ghosting, and short attention spans, Johnny's approach feels almost ancient. While most people bury their heartbreaks, he wears his on his skin, in his art, in his music. Friends who know him say he's the kind of man who keeps little keepsakes from his relationships, letters, photos, gifts. He remembers anniversaries long after the relationship has ended. He plays songs that remind him of certain moments. It's as though, for Johnny, love never disappears. It just changes shape. And isn't that the very definition of timeless romance? The idea that love doesn't vanish just because the relationship doesn't last. The idea that it still leaves a mark, that it still matters, that it becomes part of the larger narrative of your life. For most people, that's hard to accept. It's easier to erase, to delete, to pretend it never happened. But artists like Johnny don't have that luxury, or maybe they don't want it. For them, love is woven into the fabric of their identity. It's part of their DNA. Psychologists call this the imprint of love. The idea that certain connections leave permanent marks on the brain and the heart. And here's the thing, most people try to fight that. They want to move on, to forget, to start over. But creatives lean into it. They embrace the imprint. They let it shape them. And when you watch Johnny Depp, you can see it. Every love, every heartbreak, every chapter has left an imprint on him. You can hear it in the way he talks, see it in the way he carries himself, and even feel it in the art he creates. Now let me ask you something. How many of us have that one person we never quite got over? That one relationship that even years later still crosses our mind when a certain song plays, or when we pass by a certain place? Most of us do, but unlike Johnny, we often bury it. We don't talk about it. We pretend it's gone. Johnny, though, he doesn't bury it. He acknowledges it. He lets it stay with him, and maybe that's why he still believes in timeless romance. Because for him, love isn't about perfection or permanence. It's about permanence in memory, in meaning, in story, and maybe that's the real secret. Johnny Depp's secret to forever love isn't about finding the perfect partner and living happily ever after. It's about carrying every love with you, letting each one transform you, letting each one add another chapter to your story. It's about never erasing, never pretending it didn't matter. It's about believing that love, once it exists, always exists, even if it changes form. So, when psychologists say artists are more likely to believe in timeless romance, Johnny is living proof. He doesn't erase. He carries. He transforms. And no matter what happens, he keeps believing. And isn't that something worth thinking about? And maybe that's his real secret. Not that he's found the one and lived happily ever after, but that he refuses to let heartbreak steal his belief in love. He refuses to let the world's cynicism turn him cold. He keeps choosing to believe. Now let me ask you this. Do you believe in timeless romance? Do you think it's possible to carry love in your heart forever, even if it doesn't last in real life? Or do you think that's just something out of a Hollywood movie? Because that's the question Johnny forces us to ask ourselves. And honestly, maybe that's why his love life fascinates people so much. Because deep down, no matter how cynical we act, we all want to believe in forever. We all want to think that love can outlast heartbreak, time, and even distance. Johnny might be flawed, complicated, and controversial, but he reminds us of something simple. That love, in its purest form, never really dies. So maybe that's the takeaway. Maybe the secret to forever love isn't about perfection. Maybe it isn't about finding someone who never hurts you. Maybe it's about never losing faith in love itself. And if Johnny Depp, after everything, still believes, maybe we can too. So what do you think? Do you believe in forever love? Do you think timeless romance exists? Or do you think it's just a beautiful illusion? Share your thoughts, because this is one of those conversations that gets people thinking, and if you enjoyed exploring this softer, hidden side of Johnny Depp, then I promise you'll love my other deep dives. In fact, I recently covered one of his secret romances that stayed hidden for years. It's a story you won't want to miss. Before you go, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories of Hollywood's biggest stars, and share this with a friend who still believes in true love. Because maybe, just maybe, Johnny's right. Maybe love really can be forever.